drugs that are given to children that are so dangerous that the FDA requires the black box warning. And what it says, and a big sticker on the side of the box, is this drug can cause suicidal thinking and behaviour, aggression, worsening depression, mania, psychosis, cardiac arrest, blah, blah, blah. This is the warning on the box in New Zealand. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And don't think that when you open the box there's a package insert telling you what the risks and side effects could be. Nothing. Absolutely, totally nothing. I buy a box of tampons at the supermarket and I pull out a package insert that tells me about toxic shock syndrome, which is a really small risk. And it tells me how to use the product safely. I buy cat food and it talks about what's in it and, you know, but Prozac for my child, absolutely nothing.
That's all psychotropics.
The regulator in New Zealand, MedSafe, stood up in my son's inquest and said to the coroner, we have been asking government for years for the power to require drug companies to put a black box warning on these drugs, but Parliament won't give us that mandate. And my big dream as a mother on behalf of my child is I want an amendment to Section 25 of the Medicines Act. Section 25 of the Medicines Act says, the Medicines Act is about how we regulate medications, make sure they go through an approval process, make sure that they prescribe safely. But Section 25 says any doctor can prescribe any drug to any person, even if they know that the person doesn't have a condition that responds to that drug, even if they know that it could be harmful to that person, even if they know it can be potentially fatal, and they have complete immunity from any consequences. So what's the point of having a regulatory system if you give them that loophole? Nobody ever told me that Prozac wasn't approved for people under the age of 18. And nobody told me that it was legal to give unapproved drugs to children in New Zealand. So CASPER is all about saying we believe, and we have good evidence to support the argument, that taking a social, not a medical approach to suicide prevention is the effective way to go. And the example that we use is during the BP oil spill in the Gulf. As the oil spilled into the sea, the pelicans started exhibiting signs of distress, and clearly they couldn't function as they functioned before. But nobody said, silly old deviant old pelican, need to give that pelican some Prozac. What we said is, clearly this bird is distressed and unable to function. We need to provide some immediate support, and they pulled them out and they cleaned them off. But most importantly, we need to clean up the toxic environment this bird's in. There's no point saying it's the bird's problem and leaving the oil there. Well, for us, identifying individual children or individual men or individual women and saying you're the problem without addressing the social context in which those people operate and the often toxic environments in which they're operating is never going to be an effective strategy. So what we've been looking at is countries around the world who have had historically high suicide rates and have reduced them. What are they doing that we're not doing when our rate's going up? In France, the key suicide prevention strategy is training people in the community to listen to young people. It's training parents, and you know, I know that sounds really airy-fairy, but it is worth reminding parents that when your 14-year-old says, my boyfriend dumped me, my best friend, you know, I just wish I was dead, saying, oh, for goodness sake, you're 14 years old, you don't know what love is, you're going to meet so many people, blah, 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 is actually not listening to what's going on in that young person's life. And so in France, they put training in place for parents, for teachers, and for other people in the community. In Hungary and Russia, they're reducing the direct marketing of alcohol to children and the availability of alcohol to young people and to the general population, and that's been really successful. In India, they identified that a key stress point for young people was exams. There were a lot of suicides just after exams. Kids had gone through all the stress and then they started to worry about their results. So they targeted social supports for children around exam time. Controversially, in Canada, they did some work on publicising the risk of actually not killing yourself. The fact that jumping off a motorway overpass is most likely to result in you surviving for 3 or 4 hours in the most excruciating pain and your parents having to make a decision to turn off the life support. That if you try to hang yourself and you are unsuccessful, firstly you'll probably die 3 or 4 days later in terrible pain, but you will almost definitely cause yourself brain damage. You'll never be able to make a decision again about what you eat or what you wear. If you're unsuccessful with carbon monoxide poisoning, what it does to your body will be terrible. Now I know that seems like real shock tactics, but we do that around alcohol and drink driving in New Zealand, don't we? And when children Google, and probably adults, I don't know, but the kids I've spoken to, when they Google how to kill yourself, they almost always put the word painlessly in there, because they're not looking to inflict pain on themselves. And the other strategy that has been enormously successful in reducing suicide numbers is maintaining people's physical health. Changes in mood and behaviour and lack of functioning is so often related to deficiencies in minerals and vitamins, to viral infections, to brain tumours or diabetes. And the DSM, the psychiatry manual, actually says that you must exclude physical medical conditions before you put a diagnostic label on people. But I learned after my son died that the blood tests I'd insisted were taken were not looked at by the psychiatrist. She said in the inquest that she didn't look at them. But what they showed was that my son had quite a serious B12 deficiency, which causes changes in mood and behaviour. And also at the bottom of the blood test they said that he may well be an undiagnosed diabetic and he should undergo further testing. And if my son's physical health had been taken care of before he was given any label and given a bottle of Prozac, then that could have made a huge difference, and it has made a huge difference around the world. North Dakota is a place in America that had a huge youth suicide problem, and they managed to reduce it by 47% in a 4-year period. One of the key things they did was peer mentoring. They said young people listen to young people, not to grown-ups who are just trying to ruin their fun. And so they put in programs a bit like Yellow Ribbon in New Zealand. One of the trustees of CASPER was the person who set up Yellow Ribbon in New Zealand, and Spins got it closed down. And yet peer mentoring programs are well evaluated and really successful, and now the Mental Health Foundation in New Zealand is saying, gosh, we think we better get back to this peer mentoring thing. Public awareness and education, the kind of stuff that we're doing now, there's a huge focus in North Dakota. They got kids in to teach medical students, to remind them what it's like to be a teenager. Hey, it's actually not a mental disorder to feel sad sometimes, or, whatever. Just reminding people and keeping them up to date with youth culture, which is really different than it was when I was a teenager. They did this really cool thing, which about identifying natural helpers. They said children do not go and knock on the door of mental health clinics and ask for help, but they pour their hearts out to sports coaches, and people talk to their hairdressers, and they identified a whole lot of people in the community that people do tend to naturally open up to. And instead of mentoring programs being something that was put in a little box and funded by government, they said everybody in the community, but particularly hairdressers and sports coaches and people like that, have a natural mentoring role. Let's give them the skills and tools to do that. Which I think is a
good idea.
Yeah, isn't it?
Brilliant.
And there's no harm in trying it, is there? And they set up lots of support groups so that people had a community that they belonged to. They set up support groups for everything you could think of. A support group for people with red shoelaces, or just so that everybody belonged to part of a group in the community. And one of the things that they talked about, which we hear a lot in New Zealand, is that around 75% of all the clinical studies published in the New Zealand Medical Journal are sponsored or funded by pharmaceutical companies. And the New Zealand Medical Journal has said that they're really concerned that doctors are making diagnostic and treatment decisions based on what they read in the medical journal. And so what they did was went out there and looked at ways, because GPs are really busy,